The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty main street of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, and Eleanor Preston knew her past had finally caught up with her future. She stepped down from the coach, her worn traveling dress clinging to her in the August heat of 1882, and felt the weight of every eye in town turned toward her. The driver handed down her single carpet bag, avoiding her gaze just like everyone else had for the past 3 months since she'd left San Francisco. Eleanor had learned to recognize that particular look, the one that said people knew something about her they wished they didn't. The town wasn't much to look at. A single main street stretched between wooden buildings that looked like they'd been hammered together in a hurry and left to weather the desert sun. A saloon stood on one corner, its paint peeling. Across the street, a general store advertised supplies in faded lettering. Further down, she could make out what looked like a hotel, a livery stable, and a small church with a crooked steeple. Eleanor had written ahead to secure a position as a schoolteacher. The town had been desperate enough to hire someone sight unseen, which should have been her first warning. Now, standing in the middle of this forgotten Nevada town with dust settling on her shoulders, she wondered if they'd been desperate enough to hire her once they knew the truth. "Miss Preston." A woman's voice cut through the afternoon heat. Eleanor turned to see a severe-looking woman in her 50s approaching, her face already set in lines of disapproval. "I'm Mrs. Catherine Winters, head of the school board. We weren't expecting you for another week." "The stage schedule changed," Eleanor said, keeping her voice steady. "I hope that's not an inconvenience." Mrs. Winters' eyes traveled over Eleanor's travel-worn appearance, lingering on the bare finger where a wedding ring should have been. "I see. Well, we'll need to discuss your accommodations." "I trust you received our letter." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What letter?" "The one we sent 2 weeks ago." Mrs. Winters' mouth pressed into a thin line. "Informing you that the position has been filled by someone more suitable for our community's needs." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She'd spent her last dollars getting here. She had nowhere else to go. "But I was promised—" "Circumstances change," Mrs. Winters interrupted. "We received some concerning information about your situation in San Francisco." A woman of questionable moral character is hardly appropriate to educate our children. There it was. The judgment Eleanor had been expecting since she'd boarded the stagecoach west. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to explain that the situation wasn't what they thought. But she'd learned that explanations didn't matter. People believed what they wanted to believe. "I understand," Eleanor said quietly, though she didn't. She never understood how quickly people could turn on you, how one mistake could erase everything else you'd ever been or done. Mrs. Winters nodded briskly. "The next stage east leaves in 3 days. I suggest you make arrangements." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the middle of the street with her carpet bag and nowhere to go. Eleanor looked around the town, feeling the curious stares of the people who'd stopped to watch the exchange. She saw a man sweeping the front of the general store pause to look at her. 2 women in front of the hotel whispered behind their hands. A cowboy leading his horse to the livery stable glanced her way, then quickly looked down. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and Eleanor felt sweat trickling down her back. She needed to think, to figure out her next move, but the heat and the exhaustion and the crushing weight of disappointment made it hard to form coherent thoughts. She had perhaps $20 left to her name. Not enough to get back east. Not enough to go anywhere, really. The hotel seemed like the only option, at least for now. Eleanor picked up her carpet bag and started walking toward it, her head held high despite the shame burning in her chest. She'd made it perhaps 10 steps when a voice called out behind her. "Miss Preston." Eleanor turned to see a tall man approaching from the direction of the livery stable. He was in his late 20s, she guessed, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, revealing eyes the color of summer sky. This was the cowboy she'd seen earlier, she realized, the one who'd looked away. But now he was walking toward her with purposeful strides, and Eleanor braced herself for another rejection. "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat. "My name is Robert Marlowe. I couldn't help but overhear what Mrs. Winters said to you just now." "I'm sure half the town overheard it," Eleanor said bitterly. She didn't bother to lower her voice. Robert Marlowe's expression softened. "No, she didn't. And that wasn't right, regardless of what she thinks she knows about you." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I run a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, just cattle and horses. But I've been needing help with the house and the cooking, and I haven't had much luck finding anyone willing to take on the work." Eleanor stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You're offering me a job? You don't even know me." "I know you came here expecting to teach school," Robert said. "I know you're in a difficult situation through no real fault of your own, if the gossip I've been hearing is anywhere close to accurate, and I know that everyone deserves a chance to make a new start." He met her eyes directly. "You're enough exactly as you are today, Miss Preston. Whatever happened yesterday doesn't concern me." The words were so unexpected, so completely opposite of everything Eleanor had heard for months, that for a moment she couldn't speak. She felt her eyes burning with tears she absolutely would not shed in the middle of this street. "Why would you do this?" she finally managed. "Helping me will make you unpopular in town." Robert shrugged. "I'm not much concerned with being popular. I'm concerned with doing what's right. And leaving a woman stranded in the middle of town with nowhere to go doesn't sit right with me." He put his hat back on. "The work's honest, the pay's fair, and there's a small cabin on the property you can have for your own. Separate from the main house," he added quickly. "All proper and respectable." Eleanor wanted to cry. She wanted to throw her arms around this stranger and thank him for seeing her as a person instead of a scandal. Instead, she took a deep breath and nodded. "When do I start?" "Now, if you're willing. I've got my wagon around back of the livery. We can head out before it gets any later." Robert glanced at the sun, which was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "It's about an hour's drive, and the desert cools down once the sun starts setting." "I have very little money," Eleanor admitted. "I can't pay you for the ride." "You're not a passenger. You're an employee," Robert said. "Consider it part of the job." He reached for her carpetbag. "May I?" Eleanor handed it over, still half convinced this was some kind of dream brought on by heat exhaustion. She followed Robert around the back of the livery stable, where a sturdy wagon stood hitched to 2 horses. He loaded her bag into the back and then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. The touch of his calloused hand against hers sent an unexpected spark through Eleanor's arm. She settled onto the wooden seat, arranging her skirts, and tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone had treated her with simple kindness. Robert climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled out onto the main street, Eleanor could feel the eyes of Tonopah Junction following them. She saw Mrs. Winters standing in front of the general store, her face a mask of disapproval. She saw the 2 women from earlier staring with undisguised curiosity. But she also saw Robert Marlowe's calm profile as he guided the horses out of town, seemingly unbothered by the attention. They rode in silence for the first few minutes, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves on the hard, packed road. The desert stretched out around them in shades of brown and gold, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional twisted Joshua tree. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon light. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," Robert said finally, his eyes still on the road ahead. "Whatever brought you here is your business." But Eleanor found that she wanted to tell him. Maybe it was the kindness he'd shown her, or maybe it was the relief of finally having someone willing to listen without judgment. Whatever the reason, the words started spilling out. "I was engaged to be married," she began, "to a man named Thomas Porter. He was a businessman in San Francisco, well-respected, wealthy. My parents were thrilled. I thought I was in love." She paused, watching the desert roll past. "3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he was already married. He had a wife and 2 children in Sacramento. I was going to be his mistress, though he'd never bothered to inform me of that fact." Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "When I confronted him, he laughed," Eleanor continued, the memory still sharp and painful. "He said I should be grateful he'd chosen me, that I wasn't pretty enough or rich enough to expect anything better. He said no one would believe me if I told, and he was right. His family had money and influence. Mine didn't." She took a shaky breath. "But I told anyway. I broke off the engagement and told everyone who would listen exactly what kind of man Thomas Porter was." "Good," Robert said quietly. "His family destroyed my reputation in return," Eleanor said. "They spread rumors that I'd tried to trap him into marriage, that I'd been seeing other men behind his back, that I was of loose moral character. My own family believed them over me. I lost my position at the school where I was teaching. I lost my friends. I lost everything. So you came west." "I thought I could start fresh somewhere no one knew me," Eleanor said. "But somehow the story followed me, or some twisted version of it did." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "Mrs. Winters probably heard that I was a fallen woman who'd been run out of San Francisco. She doesn't know the truth, and even if I told her, she wouldn't believe me." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I believe you." Eleanor's head snapped up. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Robert said. "I know you had the courage to stand up to a powerful man when he wronged you. I know you tried to rebuild your life when everything fell apart. I know you came here hoping to teach children, which tells me you care about more than just yourself." He glanced at her, and his blue eyes were warm. "That's enough for me to know you're a good person who got dealt a bad hand." Eleanor felt those tears threatening again. "You're very kind." "I'm honest," Robert corrected. "There's a difference." He turned his attention back to the road. "I figure everyone's got a past. What matters is what they do with their present and their future. You came here looking for a fresh start, and you deserve to get one." They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the desert in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor found herself relaxing for the first time in months, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders. There was something peaceful about the vast emptiness of the Nevada landscape, something that made her feel like she could breathe again. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to focus on something other than her own troubles. Robert's face brightened. "It's not much yet, but I'm building it up. I've got about 50 head of cattle right now, and I'm planning to expand once I've got the water situation sorted out. There's a creek that runs through the property, but it gets low in the summer. I'm working on digging a proper well." He gestured toward the landscape ahead. "The house is solid. My father built it before he passed, and it's weathered some hard years. The cabin I mentioned is smaller, just 1 room really, but it's got a good roof and a stove." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, and meant it. "It's home," Robert said simply. "I was born on that land. My parents came out here in '63, right when Nevada became a territory. They were some of the first settlers in this area." His voice softened. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter. My father lasted another 10 years before his heart gave out. I've been running the place on my own for 3 years now." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Robert acknowledged. "But I had good neighbors who helped me through it. That's one thing about living out here. People look out for each other, at least most of them do. The land's too hard to survive alone." "Is that why you're helping me?" Eleanor asked. "Because people helped you," Robert considered this. "Partly. But also because it's the right thing to do, and maybe because I know what it's like to be alone and struggling." He smiled at her, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Besides, I really do need help with the house. I'm a terrible cook and the place is always a mess. You'd actually be doing me a favor." Eleanor laughed, surprising herself. "I'm a decent cook," she admitted. "My mother insisted I learn all the domestic skills, even though she hoped I'd marry well enough not to need them." The irony wasn't lost on her. "Well, I'm grateful for your mother's insistence," Robert said. "Fair warning, though, the house is in pretty rough shape right now. I've been focused on the ranch work and letting everything else slide. It might take some serious effort to whip it into shape." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Eleanor said firmly. "I didn't think you were," Robert replied. As they topped a small rise, Robert pointed ahead. "There it is, home." Eleanor looked and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure made of wood and stone, weathered but solid-looking. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. Fences marked off corrals where horses grazed. And off to one side, she could see the small cabin Robert had mentioned, smoke-free and looking slightly forlorn. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, taking in the sweep of the valley and the mountains rising behind it. "It's got potential," Robert said. "That's what my father used to say. Everything's got potential if you're willing to work for it." They drove down into the valley as the last light faded from the sky. Robert pulled the wagon up in front of the main house and helped Eleanor down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she said, very aware of how close he was standing. "Let me show you the cabin first," Robert said, releasing her arm. "You'll want to get settled before it gets full dark." He grabbed her carpet bag and led her across the yard to the small cabin. It was indeed just one room, but it was larger than Eleanor had expected. There was a narrow bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a potbelly stove, and a few shelves on the wall. A lantern sat on the table and Robert lit it, filling the space with warm light. "It's not fancy," he said, setting down her bag, "but it's clean and dry. I aired it out last week and put fresh linens on the bed just in case." Eleanor looked around, feeling something loosen in her chest. "It's perfect," she said. "It's more than I expected." Robert smiled. "Good. There's a pump outside for water and the outhouse is behind those trees. I know it's not what you're used to in the city, but it's perfect," Eleanor repeated, turning to face him. "Really? I can't thank you enough for this." "You'll be thanking me less when you see the state of the main house," Robert said dryly. "But that's a problem for tomorrow. Tonight you should rest. I'll bring you some supper in a bit." "You don't have to do that," Eleanor protested. "You've been traveling all day," Robert said. "Let me take care of it tonight. Tomorrow you can start earning your keep." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm glad you're here, Miss Preston. I think this is going to work out just fine." After he left, Eleanor sank down onto the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the day finally catch up with her. The cabin was quiet except for the settling sounds of the wood and the distant lowing of cattle. She looked around at the simple space, her new home, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. True to his word, Robert returned about half an hour later with a plate of food. It was simple fare: beans and bread and some jerky, but Eleanor ate it gratefully. Robert didn't stay long, just made sure she had everything she needed and reminded her that the main house was just across the yard if she needed anything during the night. That night, Eleanor lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the Nevada desert. It was so different from San Francisco, so quiet and vast. There were no carriages rattling past, no voices calling from the street, no constant hum of city life. Just the wind moving through the sagebrush and the occasional call of a night bird. She thought about Robert Marlowe and his unexpected kindness. She thought about how he'd looked at her without judgment, had believed her story without question, had offered her a place when everyone else had turned her away. She thought about his words, "You're enough exactly as you are today." For the first time in a long time, Eleanor let herself believe that might be true. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then memory returned, and she sat up quickly, smoothing down her hair. A wash basin stood on a small stand near the door, and Eleanor cleaned up as best she could, before changing into a simpler work dress. She stepped outside into the cool morning air and stopped, caught by the beauty of the scene before her. The valley was bathed in golden light, and she could see the full scope of the ranch for the first time. The mountains in the distance were sharp and clear in the morning air. Closer, she could see cattle grazing in the fields and horses moving in the corrals. The creek Robert had mentioned glinted in the sunlight as it wound through the property. Robert himself was standing near the barn, talking to a horse. He was dressed in worn jeans and a simple shirt, his hat pushed back on his head, and he looked completely at ease. When he saw Eleanor, he raised a hand in greeting and started toward her. "Morning," he called. "Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Eleanor said. "What time is it?" "About 6, Robert said. "I've been up since dawn, but I figured I'd let you sleep. Thought you might need it after traveling." He gestured toward the main house. "Ready to see what you've gotten yourself into?" Eleanor followed him to the house, and when Robert opened the door, she understood what he'd meant about it being rough. The interior was indeed a mess. Dishes were piled in the sink, dust covered every surface, clothes were strewn across furniture, and papers and miscellaneous items cluttered the tables. "I warned you," Robert said sheepishly. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves. "Well, we'd better get started then." They worked together through the morning, and Eleanor found herself enjoying the simple physicality of the labor. Robert hauled water and helped with the heavier tasks while Eleanor organized, cleaned, and sorted. As they worked, they talked, easy conversation that felt natural despite the fact that they'd only met the day before. Robert told her about the ranch, about his plans for expansion and improvement. He talked about the challenges of running a place this size alone, about the droughts and the hard winters, and the constant work required just to keep everything going. Eleanor told him about her life in San Francisco, carefully at first, then with more openness as she realized he was genuinely interested. She talked about teaching, about her love of books and learning, about the small pleasures of city life she'd enjoyed before everything fell apart. "Do you miss it?" Robert asked, pausing in his work to look at her. "The city," Eleanor considered this. "I miss parts of it," she admitted. "The libraries, the theaters, the way there was always something happening. But I don't miss the crowds or the noise or the way everyone was always watching everyone else, waiting for them to make a mistake." She looked around the now much cleaner kitchen. "There's something peaceful about this, about the quiet and the space." "It can be lonely," Robert said. "Fair warning. Sometimes you can go days out here without seeing another soul. Sometimes lonely is better than being surrounded by people who think the worst of you," Eleanor said quietly. Robert nodded slowly. I suppose that's true. He picked up a bucket. I need to head out and check on the cattle, make sure they've got enough water. Should take most of the afternoon. Will you be all right here? I'll be fine, Eleanor assured him. I can finish up inside and maybe start on some supper. There's a root cellar out back with vegetables and such, Robert said. Chickens in the coop if you want eggs. Help yourself to whatever you need. After Robert left, Eleanor continued working through the house, room by room. The place was larger than she'd expected, with a good-sized kitchen, a parlor, a dining area, and several bedrooms upstairs. The furniture was sturdy but plain, clearly made for function rather than beauty. Still, there were hints of a woman's touch here and there. Curtains that were faded but had once been pretty, a quilt on one of the beds that showed careful stitching, a few pieces of china displayed on a shelf. Robert's mother, Eleanor realized. These were the traces of the woman who'd made this house a home before fever took her. It made Eleanor sad to think of that woman dying so young, leaving her son to grow up without her. She found herself thinking about Robert as she worked. He was unlike any man she'd met before. The men in San Francisco had been concerned with appearances, with social standing, with money and influence. Robert seemed concerned with none of those things. He was direct, honest, and kind in a way that felt genuine rather than calculated, and he was handsome, she admitted to herself. Not in the polished way Thomas had been, with his expensive suits and carefully groomed appearance. Robert's appeal was more rugged, more natural. It was in the way he moved, confident and capable, and in the warmth of his smile, and in those blue eyes that looked at her like she was a person worth knowing. Eleanor shook her head, pushing those thoughts away. She was here to work, to rebuild her life, not to develop feelings for her employer. That way lay only more complications and heartache. Still, as she prepared supper that evening, she found herself looking forward to Robert's return. She made a simple stew from the vegetables in the root cellar and baked biscuits in the kitchen's old cast-iron oven. By the time Robert came back, dusty and tired, she had the table set and food ready. "Something smells amazing," Robert said, washing his hands at the pump outside before coming in. "I can't remember the last time I came home to a hot meal waiting." They sat down to eat together, and Eleanor felt a strange sense of domesticity settle over the scene. It was comfortable in a way that surprised her, sitting across from Robert in the warm lamplight, sharing a meal and easy conversation. "This is delicious," Robert said, helping himself to a second biscuit. "You weren't kidding about being a good cook." "My mother believed a woman should be prepared for anything," Eleanor said. "She taught me to cook and clean and manage a household. She also taught me to read Latin and Greek and debate philosophy, which confused most people." Robert laughed. "She sounds like an interesting woman." "She was," Eleanor said, "before she decided I'd embarrass the family too much to forgive." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, and she saw Robert's expression soften with sympathy. "Their loss," he said simply. They fell into a routine over the following days. Eleanor would wake early and prepare breakfast for both of them. Robert would eat quickly and head out to work on the ranch, and Eleanor would spend her day cleaning, cooking, and gradually bringing order to the house. In the evenings, they'd share supper and talk, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. Eleanor learned that Robert had tried going to school back east for a year, but had hated it, feeling confined and restless away from the open spaces of Nevada. She learned that he loved horses more than cattle but raised cattle because they were more profitable. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor and a quick laugh, that he was unfailingly patient with animals, and that he had strong opinions about politics and justice and treating people fairly. Robert learned that Eleanor could recite poetry from memory, that she dreamed of one day writing a book, that she had a talent for drawing but rarely did it anymore. He learned that she was afraid of thunderstorms but loved the rain, that she could be stubborn when she thought she was right, and that she had a kind heart despite the hard treatment she'd received. They were becoming friends, Eleanor realized. Real friends, in a way she'd never been friends with a man before. There was an ease between them that felt both comfortable and slightly dangerous, a growing connection that went beyond employer and employee. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, she decided to tackle Robert's bedroom. He told her she didn't have to, that he could manage his own space, but Eleanor had insisted. The room was a disaster, and she couldn't stand leaving any part of the house unfinished. She was changing the linens on his bed when she found a small leather-bound book tucked under his pillow. Curious, she opened it and found page after page of writing in a neat, careful hand. It took her a moment to realize what she was reading: poetry. Robert Marlowe, the practical rancher who spent his days working cattle and mending fences, wrote poetry. Eleanor knew she shouldn't read it, that it was private, but she couldn't help herself. The poems were simple but beautiful, focusing on the land, the sky, the animals, the changing seasons. There was a loneliness in them too, a sense of isolation that tugged at her heart. One poem in particular caught her attention. It was about waiting for something you didn't know you needed, about the desert blooming unexpectedly after rain. The last lines read, "In the driest season, when hope seems lost, life finds a way to take root and grow." Eleanor carefully replaced the book where she'd found it, feeling like she'd discovered something important. Robert wasn't just a kind man helping someone in need. He was someone who understood loneliness and hope, who saw beauty in unexpected places, who had depths she was only beginning to glimpse. That evening, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sun set, Eleanor found herself studying Robert's profile in the fading light. He was talking about his plans to expand the herd come spring, his voice animated, and she realized with a start that she was happy. Despite everything that had happened, despite all she'd lost, she was genuinely happy sitting here with this man on this porch in the middle of the Nevada desert. "You're quiet tonight," Robert observed, turning to look at her. "Everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Eleanor said. "I was just thinking how different things are from what I expected when I arrived in Tonopah Junction. Different good or different bad?" "Different good," Eleanor said softly. "Very good." Robert smiled, and in the twilight his eyes seemed to glow. "I'm glad. I've been thinking the same thing. This place feels more like a home with you here." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Eleanor looked away first, suddenly shy. "I should probably head back to the cabin," she said, standing. "It's getting late." "Eleanor," Robert said, and the sound of her first name in his voice made her pause. He'd been calling her Miss Preston all this time, maintaining proper formality. "Thank you for everything you've done here, for giving this place a chance, for giving me a chance." "You gave me a chance when no one else would," Eleanor said. "I'm the one who should be thanking you." "Maybe we're both grateful," Robert suggested. "Maybe that's all right," Eleanor smiled. "Maybe it is. Good night, Robert. Good night." As Eleanor walked across the yard to her cabin, she was acutely aware of Robert still sitting on the porch, watching her go. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, and it made her skin tingle in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. She was falling for him. The realization hit her as she lit the lamp in her cabin and sat down on the bed. Despite all her resolutions to keep her heart guarded, despite knowing how badly things could go wrong, she was falling for Robert Marlowe. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer came sooner than she expected. A few days later, Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing bread when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 3 riders coming down the road toward the house. Her stomach clenched with anxiety. Visitors could mean trouble, especially if word had spread from town about her presence here. Robert came out of the barn and walked toward the riders, and Eleanor watched through the window as he spoke with them. One of the men gestured back toward Tonopah Junction, clearly agitated about something. Robert's expression grew serious, and he glanced toward the house. Eleanor stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. After a few more minutes of conversation, the riders left and Robert headed toward the house. Eleanor met him at the door. "What was that about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Robert's jaw was tight. "That was Tom Henderson and his sons. They have the ranch east of here. Tom wanted to warn me that Mrs. Winters has been talking around town about you being here. She's saying inappropriate things, trying to stir up trouble." Eleanor felt her face flush with shame. "What kind of things?" "Nothing worth repeating," Robert said firmly. "And nothing anyone with sense would believe. Tom wanted me to know so I'd be prepared if anyone comes around causing problems. He also wanted me to know that he and his family don't pay attention to gossip, and they think what you and I do on this ranch is our own business." "That's kind of him," Eleanor said quietly. "But I don't want to cause trouble for you, Robert, if having me here is going to damage your reputation." "I don't care about my reputation," Robert interrupted. "Not when it comes to doing what's right. You belong here, Eleanor. You're not going anywhere." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Eleanor's throat tight. "Why are you doing this? Really? You could have any number of women from town willing to work for you without all this controversy." Robert stepped closer, and Eleanor could see the intensity in his blue eyes. "I don't want anyone else. I want you here." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "These past few weeks have been the best I can remember in a long time. Coming home to a clean house and a hot meal is part of it, but that's not all. It's coming home to you. It's talking with you every evening. It's watching you bring life back into this place. You've made everything better just by being here." Eleanor's heart was racing. "Robert, I know this is probably inappropriate," Robert continued. "I know I'm your employer and I shouldn't be saying these things, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. You're smart and strong and kind, and you deserve so much better than what life has given you. You deserve someone who sees how special you are." "You see it," Eleanor whispered. "Yes, I do." Robert reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. "I've seen it from the moment I met you. You were standing in the middle of that dusty street looking lost and hurt, but you held your head high. You didn't let them break you. That takes real strength." Eleanor leaned into his touch without thinking, her eyes fluttering closed. When had anyone last touched her with such tenderness? "I'm broken in plenty of ways," she admitted. "We all are," Robert said, "but broken things can heal, and you're stronger than you think. You left everything behind and came west looking for a new start. You've worked hard here and never complained. You've taken all the judgment and gossip and kept going. That's not weakness, Eleanor, that's courage." She opened her eyes and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have feelings for you," Robert said simply. "Strong feelings. And if there's any chance you might feel the same way, I'd like the opportunity to court you properly. To see if what I think is growing between us might become something more." Eleanor's mind was spinning. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to throw caution to the wind and let herself fall completely. But another part, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, held back. "I'm scared," she admitted. "The last time I trusted a man with my heart, he broke it and destroyed my life." "I know," Robert said. And I can't promise I'll never hurt you or disappoint you because I'm human and imperfect. But I can promise I'll always be honest with you. I can promise I'll respect you and value you. And I can promise that if you give me your heart, I'll do everything in my power to treasure it. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I have feelings for you too, she said. I've been trying not to, trying to keep my distance, but I can't help it. You've been so kind to me, so accepting. You've made me feel like I'm worth something again. You are worth something, Robert said firmly. He brushed away her tears with his thumb. You're worth everything. Then he kissed her, soft and gentle, and Eleanor felt something inside her unlock. All the fear and pain and shame she'd been carrying melted away, replaced by warmth and hope and the sweet certainty that this was right. This man, this moment, this feeling was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Robert rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean yes? He asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Yes, Eleanor said. Yes to courting. Yes to seeing where this goes. Yes to everything. Robert pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor let herself relax against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time since her world had fallen apart in San Francisco, she felt safe. She felt like she'd found where she belonged. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and grew. Robert continued to work the ranch while Eleanor managed the house, but now there was a new dimension to their interactions. Stolen kisses in the kitchen, held hands during evening walks, quiet conversations about dreams and hopes and the future they might build together. Robert was everything Thomas Porter had not been. He was honest and straightforward, never playing games or hiding his feelings. He respected Eleanor's opinions and valued her intelligence. He made her laugh with his dry humor and touched her heart with his unexpected gentleness. When he looked at her, she felt beautiful and worthy and cherished. They talked about everything. Robert shared his fears about the ranch, about whether he was good enough to make his father's dreams succeed. Eleanor shared her grief over losing her family, her anger at how easily people had believed the worst about her. They comforted each other and encouraged each other, and the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. One evening in late September, they were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge when Robert said, "I want to show you something." He led her into the house and upstairs to his bedroom. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but Robert just smiled and pulled out the leather-bound book from under his pillow. "You found this, didn't you?" he asked. "When you were cleaning a few weeks ago." Eleanor's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I know how I left it, and it wasn't quite the same when I came back," Robert said. He wasn't angry, just amused. "It's all right. I don't mind. Actually, I want you to read some of them. I've never shared my writing with anyone before, but I'd like to share it with you." They sat on the bed, shoulders touching, and Robert read his poems aloud. His voice was quiet but steady, and Eleanor felt privileged to hear these intimate expressions of his inner life. The poems about loneliness took on new meaning now that she understood them. The poems about hope felt prophetic. When he finished, Eleanor took the book from his hands and paged through until she found one near the back, one he hadn't read. It was titled simply Eleanor and was dated a week after she'd arrived. "Read it," Robert said softly. Eleanor read. She arrived like rain in the desert, unexpected and life-giving. She carried storms in her eyes and strength in her spine. The world had tried to break her, but she stood tall anyway. "I saw her and knew, this is what I've been waiting for, not someone perfect, but someone real. Someone brave enough to begin again." Eleanor looked up at Robert with tears in her eyes. "You wrote this after knowing me for just a week." "I knew even then," Robert said. "I knew you were special. I knew I wanted you in my life." He took her hand. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor." Hell, I think I'm already there. I love you too, Eleanor said, the words coming easily because they were true. I didn't think I could trust anyone again, but I trust you. I didn't think I could open my heart again, but you've opened it. I love you, Robert. They kissed, deeper and more passionate than before, and Eleanor felt herself melting into him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Robert stood and helped her to her feet. I should walk you back to the cabin, he said, his voice rough. Before I forget myself and compromise your honor. Eleanor laughed, feeling giddy and happy. You're a good man, Robert Marlowe. I'm trying to be, Robert said. For you, I want to be the best man I can. They walked hand in hand across the yard under a sky full of stars. At the cabin door, Robert pulled Eleanor close for one more kiss. I want to marry you, he said against her lips. I know it's fast, but I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Will you think about it? I don't need to think about it, Eleanor said. Yes, I'll marry you. Robert swept her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, his eyes were shining. I'll do right by you, he promised. I'll make you happy. You already do, Eleanor said. They made plans to be married as soon as possible. Robert wanted to do it properly, with a church service and witnesses, even if it meant facing the disapproving folks in Tonopah Junction. Eleanor agreed, wanting their marriage to be official and recognized, a statement that they had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Robert drove into town the next day to make arrangements with the minister. He came back looking thoughtful. The Reverend Mills agreed to marry us, he told Eleanor. He's a good man. He said he'd heard the gossip about you but preferred to judge people on their character rather than rumors. He wants to meet you first, though, to make sure this is what you really want. That's fair, Eleanor said. When? Tomorrow afternoon. I thought we could both go in together. Eleanor felt nervous as they drove into Tonopah Junction the next day, but Robert's steady presence beside her gave her courage. They went straight to the small church at the end of the main street, and Reverend Mills welcomed them warmly. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He invited them into his office and spoke with Eleanor for nearly an hour, asking about her background, her beliefs, her feelings for Robert. He seemed satisfied with her answers. I can see you're sincere, he told her, and I can see that you and Mr. Marlowe care deeply for each other. That's a good foundation for a marriage. He turned to Robert. You understand that there may be some talk in town, some people who won't approve. I understand, Robert said firmly, and I don't care. Eleanor is going to be my wife, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Reverend Mills smiled. Spoken like a man in love. Very well, let's set a date. How does 2 weeks from Sunday sound? They agreed, and as they left the church, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. They were really doing this. They were going to be married. As they walked back to the wagon, they passed Mrs. Winters on the street. She stopped and stared at them, her face pinched with disapproval. Mr. Marlowe, she said coldly, I'm surprised to see you're still harboring that woman. Robert stopped and turned to face her. His voice was calm but steely when he spoke. Mrs. Winters, this woman has a name. It's Eleanor Preston, and she's going to be my wife. I'd appreciate it if you'd show her the respect she deserves. Mrs. Winters' eyes widened. Your wife? Surely you can't be serious. Do you know what people are saying about her? I know exactly what people are saying, Robert replied. And I know it's all lies spread by people who care more about appearances than truth. Eleanor is a good, honest woman who was wronged by someone with more power than conscience. If you and the other gossips in this town want to judge her for that, that's your business. But it's not going to change my mind or my heart. You'll regret this, Mrs. Winters said stiffly. Mark my words. The only thing I'd regret is letting someone like you keep me from marrying the woman I love, Robert said. He took Eleanor's hand and led her away, leaving Mrs. Winters sputtering on the sidewalk. Eleanor was shaking by the time they reached the wagon. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Now she'll make things even harder for you." "Let her try," Robert said. "I meant every word I said. You're going to be my wife, and I won't let anyone disrespect you." They climbed into the wagon, and as they drove out of town, Eleanor found herself smiling despite the confrontation. Robert had stood up for her without hesitation, had claimed her publicly as his own. It made her feel valued and protected in a way she'd never experienced before. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor sewed herself a new dress, simple but pretty, in a soft blue fabric Robert had brought her from town. Robert cleaned and repaired the main house from top to bottom, wanting everything perfect for when Eleanor moved in as his wife. They invited Tom Henderson and his family to the wedding, along with a few other neighbors Robert was friendly with. Reverend Mills would officiate, and his wife had offered to help with the arrangements. The night before the wedding, Eleanor lay in her cabin feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow, she would become Eleanor Marlowe. Tomorrow, she would start a new life with a man who loved and respected her. It felt like a dream, like something too good to be true. There was a soft knock on her door, and when Eleanor opened it, she found Robert standing there in the moonlight. "I know I'm not supposed to see you before the wedding," he said, "but I couldn't sleep, and I wanted to make sure you were all right, to make sure you weren't having second thoughts." Eleanor stepped outside and into his arms. "No second thoughts," she said, "just first-night jitters." Robert held her close. "I'm nervous too," he admitted. "I want everything to be perfect for you. I want to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Eleanor said, "just by being you, just by loving me." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms under the Nevada stars. Finally, Robert pulled back and cupped Eleanor's face in his hands. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm going to stand in front of God and everyone and promise to love you for the rest of my life, and I want you to know that I mean it. Not because I think I should, not because it's expected, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." "Tomorrow," Eleanor replied, "I'm going to promise the same thing, and I'll mean it too. You've given me back my life, Robert. You've given me back myself. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." They kissed long and deep, a promise of all the tomorrows to come. Then Robert reluctantly pulled away. "I should let you sleep," he said. "Big day tomorrow." "Big day," Eleanor agreed, smiling. She watched him walk back to the main house, her heart full. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect October days when the desert air is crisp and clean. Eleanor dressed carefully in her new blue dress, pinned up her hair, and looked at herself in the small mirror on the cabin wall. She looked happy, she realized. The hunted look that had followed her from San Francisco was gone, replaced by the soft glow of a woman in love. Mrs. Mills arrived mid-morning to help Eleanor with final preparations and to act as her attendant, since Eleanor had no family or friends of her own nearby. The minister's wife was a kind, round woman who chattered cheerfully as she helped Eleanor with her hair and dress. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Mills said, stepping back to admire her work. "Mr. Marlowe is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Eleanor said. They drove to the church together, where a small group had gathered. The Henderson family was there with warm smiles and genuine good wishes. A few other neighboring ranchers had come as well, men Robert had helped over the years who wanted to return the kindness. Reverend Mills stood at the altar, ready to perform the ceremony. And there was Robert, standing at the front of the church in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face lighting up when he saw Eleanor. She walked down the short aisle toward him, and when she reached his side, he took her hand and held it like it was something precious. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're not so bad yourself," Eleanor whispered back, making him smile. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged the traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife and told Robert he could kiss his bride, Robert pulled Eleanor close and kissed her thoroughly, to the laughter and applause of their small group of witnesses. Eleanor felt like she was floating as they signed the marriage certificate and accepted congratulations from the assembled guests. Mrs. Henderson hugged her warmly and told her she was always welcome to visit. Tom Henderson shook Robert's hand and told him he'd done well for himself. They had a small celebration at the church, with cake and coffee provided by Mrs. Mills. Eleanor found herself relaxing and actually enjoying the gathering, feeling for the first time like she might have a community here, people who accepted her for who she was. As the sun began to set, Robert and Eleanor drove back to the ranch as husband and wife. The evening air was cool and sweet, and Eleanor leaned against Robert's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Happy?" Robert asked, kissing the top of her head. "So happy," Eleanor said. "Thank you for today. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for saying yes," Robert replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." When they arrived home, Robert lifted Eleanor into his arms and carried her over the threshold of the main house, both of them laughing. He set her down gently in the parlor, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by something more intense. "Eleanor Marlowe," Robert said, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Eleanor said. They came together in a kiss that quickly deepened, months of restrained desire finally given permission to flourish. Robert lifted Eleanor into his arms again and carried her upstairs to the bedroom they would now share. The room was clean and neat, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a vase on the dresser. "I wanted it to be nice for you," Robert said, setting her down gently. "It's perfect," Eleanor whispered. "Everything's perfect." That night, they came together as husband and wife, and Eleanor discovered that love and desire could be something beautiful when shared with the right person. Robert was gentle and patient, making sure Eleanor felt safe and cherished. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, both breathless and happy, Eleanor felt complete in a way she never had before. "I love you," Robert murmured against her hair. "I love you too," Eleanor replied, tracing patterns on his chest. "More than I ever thought possible." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Eleanor's last thought before drifting off was that she was finally home. The weeks and months that followed were the happiest of Eleanor's life. She settled fully into her role as Robert's wife, managing the household and helping with the ranch work where she could. She learned to ride horses, to help with branding and roundups, to navigate the practical challenges of ranch life. But more than that, she learned what it meant to be truly loved and accepted. Robert never made her feel less than his full equal. He valued her opinions on ranch decisions and consulted her on plans for the future. He encouraged her to pursue her interests, even buying her books from town and suggesting she take up her drawing again. Winter came to Nevada, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Robert and Eleanor spent the long evenings by the fire, reading together, talking, planning for the spring. They dreamed about expanding the ranch, maybe building a bigger house someday, starting a family. "How many children do you want?" Eleanor asked one night, curled up beside Robert on the settee. "As many as you're willing to give me," Robert said, smiling. "I grew up lonely as an only child. I'd like our kids to have siblings." "2 or 3 sounds good," Eleanor said. "Maybe more if things go well." "Things will go well," Robert said confidently. With you beside me, how could they not? In February, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Robert over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He jumped up, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're having a baby," Eleanor confirmed, laughing at his enthusiasm. Robert set her down gently, suddenly careful. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working so hard?" "I'm fine," Eleanor assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm strong enough to handle it." But Robert fussed over her anyway, and Eleanor found his concern endearing rather than smothering. He took on more of the household chores, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and was constantly asking if she needed anything. As spring arrived and Eleanor's belly began to swell with their child, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Robert converted one of the upstairs bedrooms into a nursery, building a cradle by hand and painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Eleanor sewed baby clothes and blankets, enjoying the peaceful domesticity of preparing for their new arrival. Word of the pregnancy spread through the community, and to Eleanor's surprise, several of the neighboring women began stopping by with gifts and advice. Mrs. Henderson became a regular visitor, sharing her experiences with her own children and helping Eleanor prepare. Even some of the women from town, the ones who had gossiped about her, began to soften. Seeing Eleanor and Robert's obvious happiness, their genuine love for each other had apparently changed some minds. Mrs. Winters still sniffed disapprovingly whenever she saw them, but she was increasingly alone in her judgment. One afternoon in early summer, Eleanor was in the garden tending to the vegetables when she heard a wagon approaching. She straightened up, her hand on her lower back, and saw an unfamiliar couple driving toward the house. The woman was young, perhaps Eleanor's age, with dark hair and a friendly face. The man beside her was older, with graying temples and a kind smile. They stopped the wagon and the man helped the woman down, and Eleanor noticed the slight swell of the woman's belly. She was pregnant too, though not as far along as Eleanor. "Mrs. Marlowe," the woman called. "I'm Sarah Chen, and this is my husband, Henry. We just bought the old Morrison place about 10 miles south of here. Mrs. Henderson said you might be willing to receive visitors." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Of course, please come in. I'll make some tea." Over tea in the kitchen, Eleanor learned that Sarah and Henry were originally from San Francisco. Henry was a doctor who had decided to move west to escape the crowded, competitive medical environment of the city. Sarah was a former teacher who had given up her position when she married. "It's so nice to meet another educated woman out here," Sarah said enthusiastically. "Not that the other ladies aren't wonderful, but it's refreshing to talk to someone who shares similar interests." Eleanor felt an instant kinship with Sarah. They talked for hours about books and ideas and their experiences in San Francisco. When Eleanor finally shared her own story about why she'd left the city, Sarah's eyes filled with sympathy. "How awful for you," Sarah said. "I'm so sorry you went through that." "Men like that should be held accountable, but they never are they?" "Not often enough," Eleanor agreed. "But it brought me here to Robert, so I suppose some good came of it." "Your husband seems like a wonderful man," Sarah said. "The way Henry described him, Robert helped Henry and me when our wagon broke down on the road last week. He spent 2 hours fixing it and wouldn't accept any payment." "That sounds like Robert," Eleanor said fondly. Sarah became a regular visitor over the summer, and the friendship between the two women deepened. It was good for Eleanor to have a female friend close to her own age, someone she could talk to about the changes pregnancy brought and share the excitement of impending motherhood. In September, Eleanor went into labor. Robert rode hard to fetch Henry Chen, who arrived quickly with his medical bag in a calm, professional manner. Sarah came too to help however she could. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Robert stayed by Eleanor's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. When Eleanor felt like she couldn't go on, Robert's steady presence kept her grounded. Finally, as the sun reached its peak the next day, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment she heard his first cry, all the pain and exhaustion faded, replaced by overwhelming love and joy. "You did it," Robert said, tears streaming down his face as Henry placed the baby in Eleanor's arms. "He's perfect. You're perfect." The baby had a dusting of light brown hair like his father and blue eyes that would probably darken as he grew. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked, looking up at Robert. "I was thinking James," Robert said. "James William Marlowe." "William was my father's name." "James William Marlowe," Eleanor repeated. "It's perfect." Over the following weeks, Eleanor and Robert adjusted to life with a newborn. James was a good baby, relatively calm and quick to settle, but he still required constant attention. Eleanor found herself exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before, but every time she looked at her son, her heart filled with such fierce love that the exhaustion seemed worth it. Robert was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking James when he cried and marveling at every little thing the baby did. Eleanor would often find Robert sitting beside James's cradle, just watching him sleep, a look of pure wonder on his face. "I can't believe we made him," Robert said one night as they stood together looking down at their sleeping son. "He's half you and half me. It's a miracle." "Life is a miracle," Eleanor agreed. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never be happy again. And now look at us. We have a home, a family, a future." Robert pulled her close. "You gave me all of that. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was expected, not because I had anything to work for. You made everything mean something." "We gave it to each other," Eleanor corrected. "You saved me, Robert. You gave me acceptance when I expected judgment. You gave me love when I thought I'd never trust anyone again. You showed me that I was enough exactly as I was." "You've always been enough," Robert said. "I just helped you see it." The years passed in a blur of work and love and growing. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere and peppered his mother with endless questions. The ranch prospered under Robert's careful management, expanding to include more cattle and better facilities. When James was 3, Eleanor gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Sarah, after no one in particular, but simply because they liked the names. The twins were more challenging than James had been, with strong personalities and a tendency to get into trouble, but they filled the house with laughter and joy. Sarah Chen became like a sister to Eleanor, and their families spent many happy occasions together. Henry established a successful medical practice serving the scattered ranching community, and Sarah gave birth to 2 daughters who were playmates for the Marlowe children. Eleanor never did return to formal teaching, but she educated her own children and several neighbor children who came to the ranch for lessons. Robert built an addition onto the house to serve as a schoolroom, and Eleanor found great satisfaction in passing on her love of learning to the next generation. As the children grew and the ranch thrived, Eleanor and Robert's love only deepened. They'd weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and accidents, the ordinary challenges of life and parenthood. Through it all, they'd remained each other's greatest support and truest friend. One evening, Nearly 10 years after Eleanor's arrival in Tonopah Junction, she and Robert sat on the porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. James was teaching the twins to rope fence posts, and their laughter floated across the evening air. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different?" Robert asked. "If I hadn't offered you that job, if you'd gone back east on the next stage," Eleanor shuddered. "I try not to. It's too awful to contemplate. I think I would have ended up completely broken if I'd gone back." "I think you would have survived," Robert said. "You're stronger than you know, but I'm grateful every day that you didn't have to, that you're here with me instead." "I'm grateful too," Eleanor said. She looked out at the land she'd come to love, at the house they'd built together, at the children who represented their future. "Sometimes I think about that girl who stepped off the stage all those years ago, expecting judgment and rejection. I wish I could tell her that everything was going to be all right, that she was going to find a home and a family and a love greater than she'd ever imagined. She found all that because she was brave enough to keep going," Robert said. "Brave enough to accept help when it was offered. Brave enough to let herself love again." Eleanor turned to look at her husband, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her. His hair was starting to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they'd met. "I love you, Robert Marlowe," she said, "more than I could ever possibly express." "I love you too, Eleanor Marlowe," Robert replied. "You're my everything. You always will be." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the yard, their children continued to play, unaware that they were watching a moment of perfect happiness, the kind that comes from a love built on acceptance and respect, and the simple belief that people deserve second chances. Years continued to pass, and the Marlowe family grew and changed. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. The twins developed distinct personalities, Thomas more serious and studious like his mother, Sarah more adventurous and impulsive. Eventually, there were 2 more children, another girl named Margaret and a boy named Daniel, completing their family at 6. The house that had once seemed too large for just Robert now bulged with life and activity. There were always children underfoot, always something happening, always noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Eleanor never forgot where she came from or how she'd arrived in Nevada. The experience had shaped her, taught her about resilience and the importance of giving people chances to prove themselves. She made sure her children understood that people's pasts didn't define their worth, that everyone deserved to be judged on their actions rather than gossip or appearances. Robert continued to be her rock, her partner in every sense of the word. They worked together on the ranch, raised their children together, faced every challenge together. Their love remained strong and steady, a foundation that held firm through every storm. As Eleanor approached middle age, she sometimes looked back on her life with amazement. She'd come so far from that broken young woman who'd stepped off the stage in Tonopah Junction, expecting condemnation. She'd built a life she could be proud of, raised children she adored, and found a love that sustained her through everything. One spring day, when Eleanor was 45 and Robert was approaching 50, they took a rare moment alone together. The children were all occupied with various tasks or visiting friends, and the house was blessedly quiet. They rode out to the creek that ran through their property, the same creek Robert had talked about on that first ride to the ranch so many years ago. They sat by the water's edge, Robert's arm around Eleanor's shoulders, watching the sunlight dance on the flowing stream. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Robert asked. About 6 months after we were married, I remember, Eleanor said. You told me you wanted to expand the herd and add another field. You were so excited about your plans. I was excited because I had someone to share them with, Robert said. All those years alone, I worked hard, but I never felt like the work meant anything beyond just survival. You gave me a reason to dream big. You gave me a reason to build something that would last. Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. We built it together. Yes, we did, Robert agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I wrote something for you. A poem. I haven't done that in years, but last night I couldn't sleep, and the words just came. Read it to me, Eleanor said softly. Robert pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and cleared his throat. His voice was quiet but steady as he read. 20 years ago, you arrived broken but unbowed, expecting judgment, receiving acceptance instead. I saw beyond the gossip to the woman you were, strong and kind and deserving of love. You brought life to this land and light to my days, filled my empty house with laughter and warmth, gave me children who are my legacy and my joy, loved me through seasons of drought and plenty. You were enough then, exactly as you were, and you're enough now, exactly as you are, not despite your past but including it, every scar a testament to your strength. We built a life from nothing but hope and hard work, and every day I'm grateful you said yes. Yes to the ranch, yes to me, yes to us, yes to believing in second chances and new beginnings. 20 years on, my love has only grown deep as the creek that runs through our land, steady as the mountains that rise in the distance, eternal as the desert sky we live beneath. You are my partner, my love, my everything, and I promise to spend whatever years remain reminding you every day that you're enough, more than enough. You're my whole world. By the time Robert finished reading, Eleanor was crying, tears of joy streaming down her face. She turned to him and pulled him into a kiss, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. Thank you, she whispered when they pulled apart. Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. Thank you for loving me when I couldn't love myself. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for trusting me with your heart, Robert replied. For taking a chance on a rough cowboy with a failing ranch and big dreams. For making those dreams come true. They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, talking about their children, their hopes for the future, the grandchildren they'd someday have. They talked about expanding the ranch to include James when he was ready, about teaching the younger children to run it too, about building a legacy that would last for generations. As the sky turned orange and gold, they walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to rejoin the cheerful chaos of their family. Eleanor looked up at Robert and smiled, feeling more content than she'd ever thought possible. She had arrived expecting judgment and found acceptance. She had come broken and been made whole. She had been told she wasn't enough and found someone who believed she was everything. The house came into view, lights glowing in the windows, and Eleanor could hear her children's voices carrying across the evening air. This was home. This was family. This was love, and it was more than enough. It was everything. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The Marlowe children grew into adults, each finding their own path while staying connected to the land that had shaped them. James married a girl from a neighboring ranch and built his own house on the Marlowe property, taking over more of the ranch operations as Robert began to slow down. Thomas became a lawyer, studying in Carson City, but returning home frequently, always drawn back to his family. Sarah, true to her adventurous nature, married a deputy marshal and moved to Reno, though she visited often with her growing family. Eleanor watched her children build their own lives with pride and satisfaction. She'd given them the security and love she'd been denied in her darkest hour, and they'd flourished because of it. They were kind, strong individuals who treated others with respect and stood up for what was right. Robert and Eleanor grew old together gracefully, their love aging like fine wine, deepening and becoming richer with time. They spent their later years as doting grandparents, their house once again filled with the laughter of children, this time their grandchildren. On their 30th anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the expanded house to bursting, and there was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Sarah Chen and Henry were their two old friends who had become family over the decades. As the party wound down and the evening grew late, Robert pulled Eleanor aside and led her out to the porch, where they'd spent so many evenings over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was soft with the promise of summer. 30 years, Robert said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you standing in that dusty street. Sometimes it feels like we've been together forever. Both are true, Eleanor said, leaning against him. Time is strange that way. Do you have any regrets? Robert asked. Anything you wish had been different? Eleanor thought about it seriously, then shook her head. No, not anymore. I used to regret what happened in San Francisco, all the pain and humiliation. But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have come here. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have this life. She gestured to the house behind them, full of family and love. I wouldn't trade this for anything. Not even for your family's acceptance. Your old life, especially not for that, Eleanor said firmly. That life was built on appearances and expectations. This life is built on truth and love. There's no comparison. Robert kissed the top of her head. You've made me the happiest man alive, Eleanor Marlowe. Every single day for 30 years, you've made me grateful I was brave enough to walk up to you and offer you a chance. I was the brave one, Eleanor countered. I was the one who had to trust a stranger, who had to risk being hurt again. We were both brave, Robert said, and we were both rewarded for it. From inside the house, they could hear someone calling for them, probably wanting to cut the anniversary cake Eleanor had made that morning. But for just a moment longer, they stood together on the porch, holding each other and looking out at the land they'd built their life on. Eleanor thought about that young woman who'd arrived in Tonopah Junction so many years ago, broken and scared and expecting nothing but judgment. If she could speak to her younger self, she'd tell her to hold on, to be brave just a little longer, because everything was about to change. She'd tell her that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, and that rock bottom can be the foundation for something beautiful. But most of all, she'd tell her what Robert had said on that first day, "You're enough exactly as you are today," because it was true then and it was still true now. Eleanor had always been enough. She just needed someone to help her see it. Come on, Robert said, taking her hand. Our family's waiting. Let's go celebrate the life we built. Eleanor smiled and let him lead her back inside, into the warmth and light and love that filled their home. This was her happy ending. Not perfect, but real, earned through courage and trust and the willingness to believe in second chances. As she looked around at her children and grandchildren, at her husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon, at the home they'd created together, Eleanor felt complete. She'd found her place in the world. She'd found where she belonged. And it had all started with a cowboy who offered acceptance when she expected judgment, who saw her worth when she'd forgotten it herself, who loved her not despite her past, but including it. The party continued late into the night, full of laughter and stories, and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love. When everyone finally began heading home or retiring to guest rooms, Robert and Eleanor climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room they'd shared for 30 years. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of decades together, Eleanor caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was 60 now, her dark hair mostly gray, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. She looked happy, she realized. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that went all the way to her core. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Eleanor said. "How grateful I am that you saw something worth saving when you looked at me that day." "I saw someone worth loving," Robert corrected. "There's a difference. You didn't need saving, Eleanor. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you saved yourself." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "We saved each other," she said. "You were alone and lonely, working a ranch without anyone to share it with. I was broken and lost with nowhere to go. We found each other at exactly the right moment." "Fate," Robert said, smiling. "Love," Eleanor countered. "Both," Robert concluded and kissed her. They climbed into bed and Eleanor nestled into Robert's side the way she had for 30 years. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, the sound that had lulled her to sleep thousands of times before. "I love you," Eleanor murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too," Robert replied. "Always and forever." As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, surrounded by everything she'd built and everyone she loved, her last thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage that had brought her west, for the man who'd offered her a chance, for the life they'd created together, and for the simple, powerful truth that had changed everything. She was enough. She had always been enough, and she always would be the end.